Welcome to Talking Points, everyone. I'm Esme Murphy, and of course, sitting next to me is Secretary of State Steve Simon, who is very busy these days, so I appreciate your coming in and talking to us about the elections.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, let me get right to it. Are we going to have federal agents at our polling places during the August 11th primary?
No, federal agents, we have no indication that's going to happen. That's 20 days away. Yesterday was the 3-week mark. We haven't received any indication of that. What we did see is the announcement that there would be some observers, not agents, not ICE, not Border Patrol, but some folks from the Justice Department. But that's something they've done for a number of years. They did that during the Biden administration. They've done it for this would be the 4th election in a row, and that's to enforce certain provisions of the Voting Rights Act. But we're not particularly alarmed by that. That's something they've done for a long time. But in terms of agents, no, we have not heard anything about that.
But the president specifically singled out Minnesota and a couple of other states that said observers are going to these states. Why?
That's right.
Why is he singling us out?
Well, what's interesting about that is he may not have known this, but this is something they've done for a while. It has to do with a pretty obscure provision in the Voting Rights Act having to do with those whose native language is not English. So Ramsey County, for example, qualifies under this provision. And for the last 4 elections, they've sent observers just to make sure that voters are being afforded all the opportunities that the Voting Rights Act gives them. So This is actually something that does not bother us, does not worry us. They have to comply with Minnesota law. If they're acting up, if they're interfering, they will be tossed from the polling place.
Right. I know, obviously, the president gave a speech recently talking about the threat, he says, to U.S. elections. Specifically, he mentioned China.
Right.
You have actually, in interviews, suggested that it's the federal government itself is now the potential obstacle or even the instigator. That's a quote from you.
Right.
What did you mean by that?
What I mean is every 2 years when we oversee an election, we work with our partners in counties and cities and townships. We work with law enforcement, and we have an all-hazards approach. We have to cover all hazards, a bomb threat, a blizzard, a power outage. This year, unfortunately, we have to add to that list of hazards the possibility that our own federal government will somehow interfere in this election. You know, it gives me no pleasure to say that, but we've got to at least plan for that. And just because we're planning for it doesn't mean we're predicting it's going to happen any more than our planning for a bomb threat means that we're predicting that. So what I mean is the evidence is all around us for the last year and a half that this administration wants to insert itself into the state-led administration of elections.
Just the fact that you, the Secretary of State of Minnesota, who's in charge of elections, is planning for that is frankly alarming to a lot of people. And I don't think people will take issue with you planning for it, but I mean, what scenarios are you prepared for?
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. The only limit is our imagination. So secretaries of state, attorneys general, others from around the country have really put our heads together to try to do what I think anyone does in any job in any industry, which is you hope for the best but plan for the worst. And that's what we're doing. It's the responsible thing to do. So just to give you a high-level example of what we're talking about without getting too much into the weeds, what if there's a last-minute executive order? What if there is an FBI raid of the kind that happened in Fulton County, Georgia in January, and that happens in our state or a neighboring state or somewhere else? What if there's some sort of emergency declaration? What if there's an attempt to seize ballots? And on and on and on. I don't want to get too much more specific than that, but we are gaming out and thinking about responses.
Gaming out as in planning scenarios.
Exactly. About what would happen if that happens. And just to emphasize, it's not necessarily a prediction any more than it's a prediction that there will be a blizzard because we plan for a blizzard.
So you're telling me that you are talking to other secretaries of state around the country planning scenarios in case the federal government gets involved or instigates some kind of obstacle for this election.
Yes, correct. And not just secretaries of state. It's attorneys general around the country, other allies across the country, putting our heads together and discussing the what-ifs, what might happen. Again, we hope it won't happen, just like we hope the blizzard and the bomb threat don't happen. But we have to responsibly plan for and think about our responses.
What does that – are you planning for the possibility of federal agents coming in? I mean, you said you didn't think that they were. I mean, is that are you planning for that?
Well, I'll tell you, when I'm just out and about all over Minnesota, the number one thing I get from people who talk to me, the number one, is the question of whether we'll have ICE at the polling place or Border Patrol or some sort of federal law enforcement at the polling place. And here's what I say. Number one, in Minnesota, we have really good laws on that subject about who's allowed in the polling place, for what reason, and what they can do when they're there, if they're there. That's number one. Number two, I just remind people that no one in Minnesota who's eligible to vote has to go to a polling place. We have the option in Minnesota to vote from home by mail. Now, I'm not telling anyone how to vote, but that's on the menu. The 3 ways to vote are in person on Election Day, in person before Election Day, and from home by mail. And for those who are anxious or nervous or scared about the possibility of some law enforcement at the polling place, one option available to them is to vote from home, and they don't have to go anywhere at all.
Okay. I have to ask you about New Jersey because that is a developing news story.
Right.
Apparently, New Jersey had 1,000 people registered to vote who were not eligible to vote because they weren't citizens. 400 of them actually cast a vote. The president is saying, I told you so. What's happening there, and how is that different from what's going on in Minnesota?
Right. It's night and day. That state is totally different than Minnesota, totally different system. We checked right away, and the software glitch they claim was responsible for this in New Jersey is from a vendor that we don't use for our voter registration system. It's not only apples and oranges, it's like apples and hamburgers. 2 totally different states that do things a completely different way, and we have safeguards in Minnesota that prevent that kind of thing.
All right, because as I understand it, what was happening was that as people were registering or applying for a driver's license.
That's right.
They're not citizens, but they are certainly able to get a driver's license. They were also registered to vote, which they may not have even realized.
Right.
And we certainly allow people who are not citizens and even people who are undocumented to have driver's licenses. So that's why I think people might be concerned about that.
Yeah, I totally understand that. But the reason our system is different is under our system, you aren't even placed into the pile to even be possibly registered to vote unless you provide what they call citizenship affirming documentation, naturalization papers, passport, and the like. So unless you do that, you're not even put in the pile to even be considered to vote. What happened in New Jersey, as I understand it, it was some sort of software error where even though people checked the box saying, I am not a citizen, they were honest, they were true. They said, I am not a U.S. citizen. They still got registered to vote. So it was a glitch having to do with software that we do not use in our system.
I want to ask you about the threats the administration has made to withhold certain funds that are used to protect the integrity of the elections.
Right.
What is the status of that? And I also know that Minnesota has not had the usual briefings from the federal government that it normally has on keeping elections safe and the latest intelligence. What is happening?
Yeah, what we've seen over the last year and a half is a full-scale retreat by the federal government of its traditional mission of helping the states with election security. This is something that goes back a decade, including the first Trump administration. You know, I want to give credit where it's due, and it is due here. In the first Trump administration, they were really reliable and good partners when it came to election security. They deserve credit, and I'm giving it. I'll continue to give it. But for whatever reason, in this second Trump administration, there has been a almost complete abandonment of that mission of helping states. Let me give you some examples of things that we used to rely on that are not available to us. Number one, cybersecurity. Things like penetration testing, which is white hat hacking, where you invite someone in to try to hack you. They don't do that anymore, so we've had to fend for ourselves and find others to do that, which we are. Number two, helping us with what are called tabletop exercises, where we bring partners together and game out various disaster scenarios. They used to be hand in hand with us doing that. They don't do that. And number three, which you alluded to.
Is that just Minnesota?
No, all states. I should make
states.
clear. All 50 states have been abandoned pretty much by the federal government as to election security. Red, blue, it doesn't matter. The third thing that you alluded to is intelligence briefings. We used to receive periodic and regular closed-door secret level security clearance briefings on the threat landscape, meaning are there nation states, are there non-nation actors that are trying to get into our systems, trying to influence the outcome of elections, and we used to get those. By now in an election cycle, we probably would have received at least 2 or 3. We've received 0, and I know of no plans to have another briefing. This is all 50 states. Now, I just want to reassure Minnesotans, as to almost all of those things, we have backfilled, we have filled the void, we have found others to do those things. The one exception is the intelligence briefings. That's something you can't buy off the shelf. You can't go to a store to get that. You can't find that online. But other than the intelligence briefings, all of those other services we've been able to backfill, and we feel very good about election security. So I wouldn't want anyone to interpret this abandonment by the federal government as meaning that our elections are less secure. They aren't. They're strong. The systems are good. They're sound. and I'm convinced we're going to have a secure election.
But that's an added layer of security that was there for years. I mean, you've been Secretary of State for many years now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been there every other election year?
It has, including in the first Trump administration. And again, I give them credit. They were really good, solid, reliable partners.
In terms of the Republican delegation, congressional delegation has introduced something called the Minnesota Voter Integrity Act.
Right.
What's that about?
So as I understand it, the Minnesota Voter Integrity Act basically says that federal election funds will be cut off to Minnesota unless the state of Minnesota complies with the demand by the federal Justice Department to turn over private, personal, sensitive information on our millions of voters.
For
yes,
months, if not more than a year.
More than a
right?
year.
More
Right.
than a year.
Right.
Okay, why don't we explain that? Because
Sure.
you're actually being sued over this.
Right.
There are countersuits.
Right.
Explain what's going on there and how you've kind of held firm. Other states are also
Right.
involved in suits.
That's right. In the summer of 2025, a year ago, the federal Justice Department reached out to almost every state, 49 out of 50 states, and demanded that all of us, all 49 states, hand over and turn over to them not just the public parts of our voter rolls, but the private, personal stuff as well. Social Security information, driver's license information, and the like. The first thing we did was check the law. What does the law say? And we concluded that federal law, not to mention many state laws, create silos around this very personal information, and they are not entitled to that information. And by the way, 33 states have the same legal position as us. We're not some island out there. 33 states agree with us, including very red states and very blue states. So we said, no, you don't get this stuff. They have now sued these 30-plus states, and the Justice Department so far is 0-16 in those cases. Our case is currently pending before a judge in Minnesota, so we don't know the outcome in Minnesota. But if we win that lawsuit, we'll make the Justice Department 0-17.
Okay. Are you hoping you get that decision before the primary?
I'm hoping we get it any day now, but the
Okay.
court is not to be rushed. We respect the court's judgment and pace, and we'll comply with whatever the justice system says.
All right. The administration has also threatened you with possible criminal investigation if any people who are not citizens end up voting.
Right.
Which did happen in New Jersey. It sounds like it was a bad accident, a software error.
Right.
I mean, how does that make you feel?
Well, on the one hand, it's not great. On the other hand, that letter that you're referring to was kind of old stuff. All that happened was the Attorney General's Office of the United States sent a letter to all 50 secretaries of state outlining a bunch of federal laws and what their penalties were. And I guess my response is we're well aware of those laws, we're well aware of the penalties, and we comply with the letter and the spirit of those laws. We always have, and we always will.
And that's not a concern as far as you're concerned.
It seemed like unnecessary saber rattling, but to me,
Well, there's been a lot of saber rattling.
there has. But the reason I think of it in that way, Esme, is, we who do this work, we have a job to do over the next 104 days, and to some extent, we have to tune out the noise. And we have to get rid of the obstacles that are thrown in our path, and we just have to focus on Election Day and making sure that elections are, as Minnesotans have always demanded, fair, accurate, honest, and secure. That's our mission.
The administration is really hoping to pass the SAVE Act. Right now, it appears they don't have the Republican votes,
Right.
enough Republican votes to pass it. I know you've expressed concern. A number of elected officials in Minnesota have expressed concern.
Right.
What is your concern, or what are your concerns about the SAVE Act?
Yeah, well, I understand why on the surface it sounds really reasonable, right? Hey, you got to be a citizen to vote. Why not have to show it with some papers? But when you really peel back the layers and think about how this would be implemented, there are some things that we really have to think about. For example, we have 69 million women in America who have a different last name now than the one that they were born with. So what would they do? Well, if they have a passport, no problem. That's proof of U.S. citizenship on paper. But for the tens of millions who have no passport or no document that show proof of citizenship, what would they do? Here's what they'd have to do. They'd have to show up with both a birth certificate and a marriage record of some kind, both. And that's going to be hard for a lot of people to do. And that's not just my speculation, Esme. A few years ago, Kansas passed a law of this kind on a state level in Kansas, that you needed papers showing that you're a citizen in order to vote. And when they held that election, before it was struck down, they held an election under that law. And when they held that Kansas election, 31,000 eligible Kansans, eligible, like you and me, born and raised, voting for years and decades, 31,000 eligible people in Kansas were shut out and turned away because they didn't have those documents. Now, we're twice the size of Kansas, so you can do the math. There's a real risk there. And the question I ask myself is it worth potentially shutting out and disenfranchising tens of thousands of Minnesotans to catch one or a few handfuls? Because that's what the data shows. In terms of non-citizens voting, it's not zero, but it's a microscopic number. And is it worth catching a microscopic number of people and potentially disenfranchising tens of thousands? I say no.
How many people vote that are not allowed to or that vote illegally here in Minnesota?
In terms of citizens?
Citizens and non-citizens.
Yeah. Typically, I mean, what's been reported is, I think it's the 2018 election, it's 80-some. So it averages about 20-some, maybe 30 per election. You got to imagine, though, in Minnesota, we typically have way north of 3 million people voting every election. So the last presidential election, I think it was 3.3 million people voting. And we're talking about, a couple, maybe 3 dozen people who do the wrong thing by registering the wrong way or voting when they're ineligible. It's a tiny, tiny microscopic number. Now, the standard is 0. We want perfection. Even 1 is 1 too many. No question about that. But if you really zoom out and look at the context, it is a very clean, very secure, very honest system.
Well, it's also pretty spread out. I mean, how many precincts or voting polling stations do you have here in Minnesota? A lot. Thousands. So there'd have to be interference at each one of those polling stations, presumably.
That's right.
I know that the FBI has gone and interviewed some Wisconsin elected officials. Has the FBI come at all and interviewed you or anybody else in your office that you know of?
No, not that I know of. No.
Okay. And is that something that concerns you, the fact that there are active investigations even in neighboring states over election security and apparently that the FBI is involved?
Well, I don't have an objection to there being an investigation of this crime or any crime if the facts warrant it. I think law enforcement has to follow the facts where they lead. What does concern me is reports we're getting out of the Justice Department that this is motivated not by facts on the ground, but by politics. I'll tell you, a few weeks ago, there was a story in the New York Times where they leaked what happened in a conference call between the Maine Justice Department and various U.S. attorneys across the country. And in that article, they reported that the Justice Department told the U.S. attorneys they want them to bring many and quickly voter fraud cases. And here was the money quote. They said, we want you to, quote, get creative. Get creative. Now, when I hear that, that has the whiff of a plan to bring cases that aren't necessarily and always supported by the facts. If they're supported by the facts for this crime or any crime under the sun, prosecutors should bring those cases. If, however, a case is brought for another purpose, to embarrass, to create a headline, to push forward a political agenda, that is not good. So that is something that I can tell you secretaries of state across the country paid very close attention to. Of course, follow the facts where they lead. All law enforcement, state, local, federal, of course you should do that with every crime. But if it's about politics, we can't have that in this country.
The president has said again recently that he won Minnesota 3 times.
Right.
You're in charge of all of those elections.
Right.
What was the result of those elections?
No, he lost Minnesota all 3 times. By, in some cases, large margins, in some cases by closer margins. But the point is, our system has been tested, it's been vetted. The 2020 election in particular was the most watched, vetted, litigated election in U.S. history. And when all was said and done, when the dust settles, our results have been reliable, they've been secure, they've been honest.
Can you tell me what other entities are involved in the planning of these potential scenarios? I mean, it has to include the Department of Public Safety, I would assume.
Well, I will say this. Law enforcement generally, definitely counties, cities, and townships, fellow secretaries of state, attorneys general, obviously our attorney general and attorneys general in other states have contributed to this overall effort to just think through what the scenarios are. That's it. Just to use our imaginations, and we hope it never happens. Just like we plan for a bomb threat, just like we plan for a blizzard. It's not a prediction that that thing will happen, but it's a precaution we feel we need to take, and I hope none of that stuff happens.
Right. And that's some precautions being taken by other states across the country.
Yes.
And there's a it sounds like there's a network of secretaries of state that are on the phone on a regular basis talking about this.
Yeah, I mean, network, I don't know if I'd even call it a network, but we talk amongst ourselves. We just had our summer conference last week where all the secretaries of all parties, Republicans, Democrats, all got together. And this was a topic of some discussion and concern, which is what are we going to be facing in the next 100+ days? What are some of the scenarios? What would we do if these things happened? So we talk to each other frequently and regularly, and we take on partners in our own states and across the country just to think about this. Is there something we're not thinking about? Is there something we're ignoring? Is there something we should be paying more attention to in the realm of federal potential interference? Because, as I say, the last year and a half, the evidence has been all around us, whether it's executive orders, demands for our private and personal data, primetime speeches, the threatened withholding of funds for political aims related to the election. Because of all that, we have to take that seriously. And this, to me, represents a pattern of the White House trying to insert itself into state-run, state-administered elections.
So you essentially are preparing for the potential of some kind of interference. You're not saying predicting it's going to happen, but you're planning for it.
Yes.
That's something. What should people think about that?
The bottom line that I want people to know is that we're taking this very seriously, but two things can be true at once. We're taking it seriously, we're hoping for the best and planning for the worst, but at the same time, I am really optimistic. I'm a glass half full guy about this election when it comes to election integrity and security. We have really good laws in Minnesota. We have excellent partners. We as a state have the resolve to make sure that the freedom to vote is protected for everyone, no matter how they vote, red, blue, green, purple, or otherwise. And I think we're going to have a clean and honest election, but we've got to work to make it so. We can't just hope that it happens.
And these federal observers that are coming, I mean, who are they? They're not law enforcement.
They're not law enforcement per se. They're not uniformed people with guns and badges, but they're probably going to be.
And you're sure of that?
I mean, we have no indication otherwise at this point. But the observers are typically lawyers from the Justice Department who come in and watch and take notes, and they have to abide by our state laws. If they break those laws and they break those rules, they will be asked to leave the polling place.
What would constitute a breaking of our laws?
Well, in Minnesota, any observer like that can't speak to a voter, can't stand within 6 feet of a voter, can't make any sort of challenge to a voter unless it's based on personal knowledge, not a whim, not a hunch, not a vibe. So those are the kinds of things that all of our election judges, our poll workers, are trained on, and they know they have the legal authority to escort someone out of the polling place if they violate those rules.
Okay. Obviously, the Justice Department doesn't have enough lawyers to send to every precinct in Minnesota. Are you concerned that they're going to target some precincts based on the demographic makeup of that precinct?
You know, for this upcoming primary, we have no evidence of that. They're only sending observers to places that fall within this sort of niche in the Voting Rights Act. There's some places in Ramsey County, for example, not having to do with politics, but having to do with the demographic makeup of that place in terms of folks whose native language is not English. So it's really related to that foreign language issue. And so it's demographic to the extent that there are people that fit that demographic trait.
So you know where they're going?
We know where they're going, yes.
Okay, and
yes.
If that's the case, that people who speak English as a second language or need help,
right.
That's allowed.
That's allowed.
That's
yes.
allowed at the polls. How do you draw the line there to make sure no interference happens, or there's not a clash between those who are there to help assist, legally assist with voting, and then these agents, or the not agents, I guess, just observers.
Right. Well, technically, the observers are there to make sure those folks do get the assistance.
Right.
So they're there to make sure that the Voting Rights Act, the Federal Voting Rights Act, is being complied with. But let's just say there's some sort of disagreement or there's some sort of dispute. That's where the election judges, the poll workers, are specifically trained to resolve that dispute, and they will, up to and including calling the cops or calling a sheriff's office to resolve that and get people out of the polling place who are breaking the rules.
It sounds like your office is just under a lot of pressure from a lot of different places these days. I mean, how are you dealing with that?
You know what? It's a labor of love. This is what we do. Our mission is clear, and that is to protect the freedom of vote for every eligible Minnesotan, regardless of their politics, zip code, life background. That is what we do. We're used to it. We have great partners, great laws, and we have a mission here, and that's to clear the path of obstacles to the freedom to vote over the next 104 days. And I think we're going to do that. I feel really good about our opportunity to have yet another clean, fair, honest, secure election.
Well, Secretary Simon, thank you so much for coming by. I really appreciate your time. That does it for this edition of Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.